This video is about Robert's ColourStream DAB, FM and internet radio repair. When I got it, it was completely dead, plugged into mains, there was nothing, the screen remained black, there was no reaction to any buttons to remote. So first thing I tested the power board. Here is the power board already detached from the rest of the radio. I tested the voltages, and despite AC going into the board, there was no DC voltages going out of the power supply, of the switching power supply. I tested all the diodes and other elements, ICs, and the suspected fault was a main switching power controller IC. It's called TOP256EN, and here is the application diagram for this particular IC. So I got a new one. It's quite popular, it's cheap, and decided to replace it as the most likely component that was faulty. That's the new one, and it sits on the PCB. It sits. It's attached to this big heatsink, a piece of aluminium L shape that you can see in the middle. Just one word of warning: this is. This board is obviously plugged to the mains, and there is high capacity capacitor there. You can see it next to the heatsink, and it can hold a charge even when disconnected from the mains. So always make sure that you have all the precautions. It's quite easy to get quite unpleasant, and that is the capacitor. Quite unpleasant shock. That's the capacitor, and here it is. I'm just making sure that it's discharged. This board was in the drawer for some time, so it doesn't. This capacitor doesn't hold a charge. But it's always worth to check it. First, we need to remove the screw that holds the IC against the radiator, and then some flux on the soldering point. There's 6 legs to this IC that need to be desoldered. My desoldering iron is ready, and we're going to remove solder from all the soldering point for this IC. And hopefully it will go out of the board quite easy. These ICs are used in other switching power supplies, so they're quite popular. They're used in chargers. They're used in other home appliances. And well, they fail every now and then. It's always good practice to disconnect the plug from the devices that are not used for longer periods of time, because this IC is continuously working for as long as the device is plugged into the mains. It's basically converting the high voltage DC into pulses into DC, and then the transformer you can see in the middle is reducing the voltage to the desired level, and then it's converted to AC. Here it is. That's the soldered TOP 256EN. So now we need to tidy up the soldering point on the PCB. So again, a little bit of flux, and with some soldering copper wick, we're going to remove the excess of the solder from the soldering point. That's the usual way of repairing PCBs. Now let's clean the flux and any burns that happened with the contact cleaner and the cotton swab. It's always worth to remove the old solder, the old thermal paste that was on the radiator, and we're going to put a new thermal paste. I'm comparing the old one to the new one to see what are the differences. Basically, when I put ground probe on the second pin, all other pins they were open circuit basically on the one that was working. The one that wasn't working, there was some resistance there, so it was clearly burned. Here it is thermal paste, the new one that goes on the radiator and on the chip itself. I suspect that the temperature could play a role here in why it failed. I'm not sure. These radios are quite old. I think they are more than 10 years old, so it's possible that after 10 years this chip could fail. The owner said that basically died suddenly. So the new chip is in its place, and first we're going to fix it to the radiator with a screw and a little metal holder to put it properly into position. There's quite a bit of thermal paste to make sure that the heat is dissipated. And now it's time to solder its pins again to the PCB. So flux. And all 6 legs needs to be soldered, and they need to be sort of like properly done, properly fixed to the PCB, because there are quite high currents there. It's basically MOSFET kind of transistor with some control elements, an oscillator, there's internal oscillator that gives 136 kilohertz, if I remember correctly, oscillations for the switching function. So the new part is in the power supply board. So we need to plug in again connectors. This is the mains connector that goes to the mains socket, and there are two connectors that provide voltages to the rest of the radio. But first, let's test if it's working. If the repair is successful, we're going to use multimeter and check voltages going out of the PCB board. As I said previously, there were no voltages whatsoever. The board was completely dead. It wasn't providing any voltages. Safety first. When you have exposed high voltage circuits, so it's worth to put some gloves, rubber gloves, to avoid electric shock. So mains is plug in. There's live voltage on the board, and that's where the output. So there is 15 volts output. This is the main, and then we have 5 volts and 7.2 volts. So there are 3 voltages going out of this board: 15, 5, and 7.2. And now it's time to put the whole radio together. So first, 2 connectors that provide voltages to the other components of the radio. And then we're going to do 4 screws that hold this switching power supply PCB to the plastic support that is located behind the right speaker, right, looking from the front of the radio, left, so you're looking from the rear of the radio. And then the whole front panel together with this with PCBs goes into the enclosure, and then there are 8 screws that hold the front panel to the enclosure. You need a really long screwdriver to get to these screws, and that's probably the only special tool or unusual tool that is needed for this radio. The screws are symmetrically located around the kind of speaker area, outside of the screws that hold the speaker covers. So the front panel is attached, and now we put the back cover. First we start with the antenna. There is one screw next to the antenna, and then there is a cover for the going around the antenna, cover around the aerial base with 2 screws, and then there are 4 screws that hold these PCB assemblies in place. One is to the left, 2 are to the right and to the left of the power mains socket, and two are above the sockets for the USB Ethernet and in and out, audio in and out. And then again 8 screws, long screws that hold the rear of the panel to the enclosure. Again, do not over tighten the screws, but it needs to be tight enough. There are rubber seals, if you've noticed, around the enclosure in the front and in the back, because for the bus reflex to work properly there should be no air leaks apart from the bus reflex holes that you can see, these two big holes. They are responsible for low frequency response of this radio. If there is any air leak, then this is not going to provide a good bus. Okay, and the radio is ready, done. Now it's time for a test.
Okay, good, let's plug it in. Okay, now some signs of life.
Which they often do when they're a long distance apart, but sometimes you can see that one particular elephant answers within the family, and sometimes it's a different one, and the others just completely ignore the caller. And so I wondered, well, are they just being rude by not answering, or are they able to specify, who they're calling to? And then in well, he asked me for all the recordings I had of where I knew who the caller was and who the caller was calling. And he also recorded in Samburu and then used machine learning to analyze all the data.
W ptaszkach pięknie, trochę melancholijnie śpiewał Bob Marley, a my rzeczywiście też w takim spokojniejszym nieco tempie dzisiaj o mini-magazynie piłkarskim Wielkopolskie Gole zaczynamy jubileuszowo, bo piękny
This protest wasn't about oppression in their own country. It was against racial segregation and violence happening on the other side of the world.
South African police have shot dead 17 black demonstrators. Shootings have been condemned in South Africa, in Washington, and at an anti-apartheid rally in London, where there were calls for concerted economic and other action against South Africa.
That was a BBC Newsnight report, one of many highlighting the brutality of South Africa's apartheid policy. 10,000 kilometres away, in Ireland's capital, Dublin, 21-year-old shop assistant Mary Manning was on the tills in the Dunn's groceries.